As twilight deepened over the small English village of Woodley Common, a golden glow bathed the cobblestone streets. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, mingling with the sweet aroma of pumpkins adorning every doorstep. Gnarled branches stretched like skeletal fingers toward the dusky sky, their shadows dancing eerily on the cottages. Paper bats fluttered in the breeze, and grinning jack-o'-lanterns cast flickering, toothy smiles, their carved eyes glinting with mischief. The village was alive with festive energy, yet an unspoken tension lingered, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. Beneath the laughter of children scampering in costumes and the warm glow of lanterns, a shadow of unease seemed to weave through the evening, unnoticed by most. At the grand home of Rowena Drake, the center of village gossip and social activity, the annual Halloween party was in full swing. The large, ivy-covered house stood at the edge of a wooded grove, its windows alight with a welcoming glow. Inside, the air buzzed with chatter and the clink of glasses. Rowena, a poised and commanding woman, flitted among the guests, her smile as sharp as the witch's hat perched atop her perfectly coiffed hair. Children squealed with delight as they darted between rooms, their faces painted with vibrant streaks of orange and black. Games were in progress, bobbing for apples, pinning the broom on the witch, and a particularly messy attempt at catching marshmallows dangling from strings. In one corner, a cauldron of steaming cider bubbled, filling the room with a heady mix of spices. Adults mingled near the fireplace, exchanging whispered remarks and knowing glances over glasses of mulled wine. Amid the laughter and clamor, a bold, piercing voice rang out, cutting through the merriment like a knife. "I saw a murder once," declared Joyce Reynolds, standing near the center of the room. Joyce, just 14 but brimming with the bravado of someone older, reveled in the sudden attention. She was dressed as a gypsy, her costume adorned with fake gold coins that jingled as she gestured dramatically. Her dark eyes sparkled with defiance, daring anyone to challenge her claim. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Guests exchanged startled glances, unsure if they should laugh or recoil. "You are making that up," said a skeptical voice, half laughing. "I am not," Joyce shot back, her voice unwavering. "I saw it. I didn't realize it was a murder at the time. But now, I know it was. And the killer got away with it." Her words hung in the air, heavy and electric. A chill seemed to seep into the room, despite the roaring fire. Rowena Drake's smile faltered, and she quickly moved to redirect the conversation, but the damage was done. Unease rippled through the guests like a silent wave. Joyce's declaration, made with the careless audacity of youth, had cracked open something buried, something dark and unspoken. No one realized then that her words would be the spark that set a deadly chain of events into motion. Outside, the Halloween night deepened, and the playful shadows seemed to stretch a little longer, their edges a little sharper. In the village of Woodley Common, the festive evening was about to take a sinister turn. A shocking tragedy. The laughter had long faded, replaced by the quiet hum of a party winding down. Children, sugar-fueled and drowsy, were gathered by parents bundling them into coats. The adults, their conversations mellowed by cider and mulled wine, lingered in the warm glow of Rowena Drake's home. Outside, the night was pitch black, with a cold wind rattling the last leaves, clinging to skeletal branches. It was in this waning moment of the evening, when the energy was low and vigilance even lower, that a scream tore through the house. The sound was high-pitched and raw, slicing through the murmur of voices like a blade. Every head turned toward the room where the children's games had been played earlier. There, around the tub meant for bobbing apples, a small group of stunned onlookers stood frozen, their faces pale as moonlight. At the center of the tub floated something that didn't belong Joyce Reynolds. Her body lay eerily still, her dark hair fanning out like a halo, and her once bold eyes stared lifelessly into the distance. The apples bobbed around her in a grotesque mockery of the cheerful game she had played mere hours ago. A collective gasp spread through the crowd as Rowena Drake pushed her way through, her commanding presence now overtaken by visible shock. Someone, call the police," she stammered, her voice shaking. Panic gripped the house like a vice. Parents clutched their children tightly, shielding their eyes from the grim scene. Whispers swirled, fragmented and frantic. "A terribly accident. It must be murder. She said she saw one, didn't she?" As the guests dispersed into the night, the once festive streets of Woodley Common seemed darker, the playful decorations now ominous. The village, so lively hours before, was gripped by a new, sinister energy. Doors locked earlier than usual, curtains were drawn tight, and those who passed each other on the cobblestone streets exchanged wary glances. By morning, the whispers had grown into a chorus of suspicion. The villagers, with their tightly knit community, now felt the weight of distrust among themselves. Was it an outsider, or worse, one of their own? Questions spilled over like a dam bursting. Who would harm a child? What did Joyce mean by saying she witnessed a murder? Could it be connected? Rumors began to fester, spreading with the speed of a cold autumn wind. Old grudges resurfaced, and neighbors who once shared cups of sugar now eyed each other warily. Secrets, long buried under the polite veneer of village life, clawed their way toward the surface. The once idyllic village of Woodley Common was now a cauldron of fear and paranoia, every shadow hiding a potential threat. And somewhere in the quiet corners of their homes, the villagers began to wonder if the darkness that claimed Joyce might not stop at just one victim. Hercule Poirot steps in. 2 days after the Halloween tragedy, as the chill of suspicion wrapped itself tighter around the village of Woodley Common, a car rolled up the narrow lane to Rowena Drake's home. Its passenger, a compact yet commanding figure, stepped out with the air of a man entirely at ease, no matter how dire the situation. Hercule Poirot had arrived. Dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit with a silk pocket square, Poirot adjusted his hat with the precision of a clockmaker. His patent leather shoes, polished to a mirror shine, caught the wan autumn sunlight as he surveyed the house. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture elegant, as if he were a maestro, preparing to conduct a symphony of logic and deduction. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Rowena Drake, visibly composed but with a trace of anxiety in her eyes, greeted him at the door. The other villagers gathered in the parlor exchanged curious glances, whispering among themselves. Who was this man, with his peculiar mustache and foreign air? Poirot introduced himself with a slight bow. "Madame Drake," he began, his voice smooth and measured. "I am Hercule Poirot. I have been asked to assist in the investigation of this most tragic event. Rest assured, the truth will reveal its self-doubt document." As he stepped into the room, his sharp eyes missed nothing. The scuff marks near the fireplace, the fraying thread on a cushion clutched by one of the guests, the fleeting exchange of glances between two individuals who seemed determined to avoid his gaze. Poirot's mind, a finely tuned instrument, began cataloging details with the precision of a detective who trusted his little gray cells above all else. The investigation begins. Poirot wasted no time. He invited the guests from the ill-fated party to sit with him, one by one, in the Drake drawing room. With disarming politeness, he asked seemingly innocuous questions, watching intently for the subtlest twitch of an eyebrow, the faintest hesitation in their voices. "Tell me, madam, how well did you know young Joyce? Monsieur, did you notice anything unusual at the party? And this apple-bobbing game, who organized it precisely?" What appeared to be casual conversation to the villagers was, in fact, Poirot carefully unraveling the web of relationships and motives. He uncovered snippets of whispered gossip, unspoken resentments between neighbors, an argument overheard near the cider cauldron, and the peculiar behavior of one guest who left the party early, claiming illness. The past resurfaces. It wasn't long before Poirot's line of questioning took a darker turn. Joyce's bold claim at the party, "I saw a murder," was not mere bravado, he concluded. The girl had seen something, perhaps years ago, something so buried that even she might not have fully understood its significance. Poirot's inquiries led him to the archives of the village, where an older, unresolved crime surfaced. The unsolved disappearance of a young woman nearly a decade prior. The details were chilling. A local beauty, last seen leaving a dance, vanished without a trace. Whispers of foul play had circulated back then, but no evidence was ever found. A quiet sense of satisfaction flickered in Poirot's eyes as he pieced it together. Could Joyce have been a child at the time, a silent witness to something terrible? Did she see someone that night? Someone who now feared their secret was at risk of being exposed. Back at Rowena Drake's home, Poirot called for another round of interviews, his tone firmer this time. He pressed harder, peeling back layers of deception to reveal hidden grievances, a contested inheritance, a secret affair, and even whispers of blackmail. "Ah," Poirot murmured to himself as he jotted notes in his leather-bound notebook. "This is no simple crime. It is like a tapestry, threads of jealousy, ambition, and fear, all woven together. But if one pulls at the right thread, the whole will unravel." The community watches. The villagers, once reluctant to speak, now found themselves drawn into the orbit of Poirot's quiet brilliance. They watched as he moved through the streets, asking questions, lingering at the village square, and stopping to study the old well near the chapel. Whispers of his progress spread like wildfire, and with each passing day, the tension grew. Poirot knew that the truth was close hidden in plain sight, as it so often was. The question now was whether he could uncover it before the killer struck again. The web of deception. Hercule Poirot knew that to unravel the mystery, he would need to understand the people involved. It was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about piercing through the veils of deceit that clung to the village like the morning fog. One by one, Poirot met with the key players. Each of them was a piece of the puzzle. But which one held the missing link? Rowena Drake. Rowena Drake was the first to sit with Poirot. The elegant hostess exuded grace, her composed demeanor suggesting she had nothing to hide. She offered tea with delicate hands, her fingers adorned with rings that caught the light as she spoke. "I am afraid, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth. "I do not understand what has happened. Joyce was such a vibrant girl. I cannot fathom why someone would want to harm her." But Poirot was no fool. He studied her closely, noting the brief, almost imperceptible flicker of anxiety in her eyes as she spoke. Rowena Drake's polished exterior hid a troubled past, a past perhaps linked to Joyce's murder in ways she wasn't yet willing to admit. Rowena had come from money, and her position in the village had been cemented long ago. But beneath her socialite facade, whispers of a strained marriage, unspoken debts, and a bitter rivalry with her late sister resurfaced when Poirot probed deeper. A key figure, Rowena seemed to hold the threads of the story, but the more she deflected questions, the more Poirot suspected that her poise was a mask to cover the cracks in her past. Ariadne Oliver. Next came Ariadne Oliver, the mystery writer who had recently moved to the village. Sharp-witted and never without an observation or dry remark, Ariadne had a knack for cutting through the fluff and getting to the heart of things. Her clothes were always a little more casual than what was expected of the village elite, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of intelligence that made people uneasy. "I am not one to shy away from the truth," Ariadne said, folding her arms as she regarded Poirot. "I'd be delighted to help. After all, solving murders is what I do best." Her tone was light, but there was a hard edge beneath it. Poirot listened intently, knowing that Ariadne's keen observations could lead him to important insights. The two exchanged thoughts on the case, but it wasn't until Poirot asked her about Joyce that her face betrayed something unexpected, an almost imperceptible pause. "She had a way of getting under people's skin," Ariadne remarked, her voice turning slightly distant. "But a murderer? No, I don't see that. Perhaps someone wanted to stop her from revealing too much." Was this a subtle hint? A buried truth about Joyce's past? Ariadne's sharpness was both a gift and a potential trap. Poirot noted her words. Careful Ariadne Oliver had secrets, and perhaps even more to lose than she let on. The mysterious stranger. Then there was the newcomer, the mysterious stranger, who had recently arrived in Woodley Common, under the pretense of seeking a quiet life. His name was Charles Westbrook, and his arrival had raised a few eyebrows. He was neither young nor old, but his appearance was striking. Dark, intense eyes that seemed to study everything around him with unnerving scrutiny. Charles had been at the party, but he'd remained in the background, hardly speaking to anyone. It was only after Joyce's death that he seemed to gain a certain prominence, his quiet demeanor contrasting sharply with the mounting hysteria in the village. When Poirot asked about him, people spoke in hushed tones. Westbrook was an enigma man, with no apparent ties to anyone in the village. Yet he'd chosen to settle there. No one knew much about his past, but rumors swirled. Had he been involved in an altercation with Joyce at the party? Was his presence simply a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that Charles Westbrook was hiding something, and that something about his arrival in the village was no accident. The stranger was a piece of the puzzle, but one that didn't quite fit yet. The schoolteacher, Miss Clara Hawthorne, the schoolteacher, was a regular fixture in the village, a kind, respectable woman known for her gentle nature. But there was more to Miss Hawthorne than met the eye. Her relationship with Joyce had been peculiar. While Joyce was known for her boldness, Clara had always seemed to be the one to keep her grounded. But when Poirot questioned her, Miss Hawthorne's composure wavered. "I didn't know much about Joyce's private life," Miss Hawthorne explained, her eyes shifting nervously. "She was a bright student, always asking questions, but she had a tendency to talk about things that weren't quite right. Murders, disappearances. She seemed obsessed with the idea of seeing something dark." Miss Hawthorne's voice trembled as she spoke. But it wasn't the nervousness of someone who didn't know anything. It was the nervousness of someone who knew far too much. Joyce had confided in Miss Hawthorne about a childhood experiencing an incident that had troubled her deeply. Was it possible that Joyce had stumbled upon something dark, something from Miss Hawthorne's own past? Clues and red herrings. Poirot's mind raced as he sifted through the clues. There were too many, and not enough of them made sense. An old painting in Rowena Drake's living room depicted a forgotten village legend, a tale of betrayal and death. It seemed like nothing more than a decoration, until Poirot noticed the subtle way the faces in the painting seemed to match certain people in the village. Then there was the letter, cryptic and faded, found in Joyce's room after her death. It was addressed to someone, but the signature was smudged, the ink nearly gone. The contents hinted at a deep secret, a promise that had been broken, a lie that would ruin someone's life. Poirot encountered deliberate attempts to mislead him, half-truths and deflections from those who seemed more interested in protecting their secrets than solving the murder. But Poirot knew that behind every misdirection, there was a hidden truth, a thread that would pull the whole story together. Each conversation, each clue, led to more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. Someone in this village was playing a deadly game, and Poirot would need to outsmart them all before the truth was buried for good. The unmasking. The final act of the Halloween night had arrived. Darkness descended upon the village, and the cold wind whispered through the streets. It was the hour for secrets to be revealed, for the masks to be stripped away. For a village that had been cloaked in mystery, tonight would be the final unraveling of its tangled web. At Rowena Drake's grand home, the atmosphere had shifted. What was once a house of laughter and light now felt oppressive, the very air heavy with tension. The grand chandelier overhead seemed to flicker, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The guests, once merry and carefree, were now subdued, their faces pale beneath the weight of the truth that hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. As Poirot stood in the center of the room, his sharp eyes scanned the faces of the villagers, each one now a suspect, each one caught in the web of suspicion. The room had fallen silent, every eye fixed on the detective waiting for him to speak. He raised a hand, and the room stilled further, as if holding its breath. The Halloween symbolism. This was Halloween, the night of masks and disguises. It was a time when the boundary between the living and the dead seemed thin, a time when the darkest fears could be worn on the outside. Just as the villagers had donned their costumes to hide their true selves, so too had the killer hidden in plain sight. For all the theatrics of the evening, for all the laughter and the games, one person had played the ultimate trick. Poirot's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his accent rolling over the words, "on this night, when all things are masked and hidden in shadows, it is time for the truth to emerge. For the murderer, too, has hidden in plain sight wearing a mask that none of you noticed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A sense of unease settled over the room like a shroud. Poirot's eyes never wavered as he surveyed them. He had the killer's number. All that remained was to expose them. The grand reveal. Poirot moved with deliberate steps, the tapping of his polished shoes echoing in the hushed room. With his trademark poise, he gestured to the group assembled before him, his eyes locking onto each face. We know, of course, that Joyce Reynolds was no ordinary girl. She had a gift for seeing things others overlooked. But what we also know, Poirot continued, his gaze narrowing, is that Joyce was murdered because she saw something she should not have, something that was meant to remain buried. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some of them, those who thought they knew Joyce best, felt the truth creeping up behind them. There had been whispers, yes, but no one could have imagined that the young girl's death was tied to something far darker than a mere Halloween prank. Poirot turned to face Rowena Drake. "Madame Drake," Poirot said, his voice calm, but the weight of his words was undeniable. "You claim to be an innocent hostess, but your life, your past is a tangled web of secrets and betrayal. Your sister's death, which seemed so tragic at the time, was not an accident. It was murder. A murder that you were complicit in." Rowena's face drained of color. She looked as though she might collapse under the weight of Poirot's accusation, but she remained silent, her lips pressed tightly together. Poirot took a deep breath, and, with the flick of his wrist, signaled the beginning of the end. "I know you, Madame Drake. I know you've worn the mask of the perfect village hostess, the gracious widow, for years. But your past has caught up with you. You and your sister had a quarrel over inheritance, a bitter dispute. When she threatened to expose your dark dealings, you had her killed, and you covered it up. You thought you were safe, but you were wrong." Joyce knew the truth. The room held its collective breath as Poirot's voice grew colder. "And then there is the letter. The letter Joyce found in your sister's belongings, the letter that led her to uncover the link between your sister's death and the disappearance of the young woman from years ago. Joyce had begun to put the pieces together, and she threatened to expose you." Rowena's eyes darted nervously to the other guests, but Poirot wasn't finished. "The killer's motive. But there is more," Poirot added, his gaze now focused on the one person who had been hiding in plain sight, Charles Westbrook, the mysterious newcomer. "It is not just jealousy and greed that drove you, Rowena. You were not alone." Charles Westbrook's eyes widened as Poirot turned toward him, his voice taking on a dark edge. "Ah, Monsieur Westbrook," Poirot said, his lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "I knew there was something about you. You were more than just a stranger in town, weren't you? You were her accomplice." The room went deathly quiet. Charles was no stranger. He was a man with a pasta man with a vendetta. His involvement in the village was no coincidence. He had come for one purpose, to help Rowena finish what had been started years ago. The death of Rowena's sister had been the key to a long-buried fortune, and Joyce had threatened to expose the truth. Charles, driven by desperation and his own greed, had been the one to ensure that Joyce never spoke again. Together, they had plotted her death, a death that was meant to look like an accident. But Joyce had been too clever, too bold, and now they would both pay the price for their crimes. With a dramatic flourish, Poirot concluded. Jealousy, greed, a desperate need for control. These are the motives that fueled this senseless tragedy. Rowena Drake, Charles Westbrook, you thought you could hide in the shadows. But the truth, as always, comes to light. The aftermath. The room was still. The tension was palpable as the weight of Poirot's words settled on everyone. Rowena Drake, unable to maintain her composure, broke down into sobs. Charles Westbrook stood frozen, his face a mask of fury and defeat. The truth had been revealed. The masks had been torn off, and as Poirot stood there, watching the two criminals, he couldn't help but feel a sadness swell up inside him. The tragedy had unfolded not because of a singular evil act, but because of the decay of trust, the poison of greed, and the darkness that resides in even the most seemingly innocent of hearts. But justice, Poirot knew, was always the final mascone that would never fall. The aftermath. The revelation of the truth spread through the village like wildfire, leaving an indelible mark on its inhabitants. The streets, which had once been filled with the innocent laughter of children, now echoed with hushed conversations, the shadow of a terrible secret hanging over everything. The people of the village, many of whom had never before questioned the calm facade of Rowena Drake's life, now found themselves shaken to their core. Some gathered in small groups, whispering in disbelief about the crimes that had occurred right beneath their noses. Others stared out their windows at the dark, empty streets, as if hoping that the night itself would offer some solace from the horror they had learned to be true. No one would ever look at the village the same way again. The quiet, comforting life they had taken for granted was forever fractured, shattered by a truth too ugly to ignore. In Rowena Drake's house, the once grand parlor was now a place of silence. The police had taken the bodies of the culprits, but their presence lingered in the room, an oppressive reminder of the murder and deceit that had unfolded in what was supposed to be a night of celebration. The guests who had once reveled in the festivities now filtered out of the house, their faces ashen, their steps slow, as if weighed down by the realization that the very people they had trusted had been hiding monstrous secrets all along. Justice is served. The authorities worked swiftly after Poirot's reveal. The townspeople were left in shock as they saw Rowena Drake and Charles Westbrook being led away in handcuffs. There was no sense of triumph among the onlookers. There was only the heavy, suffocating feeling of sorrow. Justice had been served, yes, but at a staggering cost. Joyce Reynolds, a bright, bold young girl with a future ahead of her, would never return. Her life had been taken by a pair of calculating murderers, whose actions had been driven by greed, jealousy, and a twisted sense of entitlement. Yet in the aftermath, Poirot found no comfort in the truth he had uncovered. For all his success in solving the case, there was a hollowness that filled him as he walked away from the scene. The guilty had been caught, but what had been lost in the process? The innocence of the village, the trust that had once bound its people together? Closing thoughts. As the last of the police vehicles disappeared down the winding lane, Poirot remained at the edge of the village, watching as the night deepened. The air had turned cold, and a heavy mist began to rise from the ground, curling around the base of the old church tower. In the distance, the soft, mournful hoot of an owl broke the stillness. But the usual tranquility of the village had been replaced by an uneasy quiet. Poirot, dressed in his signature suit, stood alone by the edge of a field, his hands clasped behind his back. His sharp eyes, though hidden beneath the brims of his hat, were lost in thought. The small village, so seemingly perfect and peaceful, had proved to be a nest of hidden secrets. And even now, as the village returned to its regular rhythm, he couldn't shake the weight of the tragedy he had just witnessed. He turned toward the old stone wall that bordered the field, where a row of dark trees lined the horizon. Beyond the trees, the village was quiet, almost too quiet. The last remnants of the Halloween decorations fluttered in the breeze-orange paper lanterns swaying on their strings, casting fleeting shadows on the cobblestone streets. Poirot's lips curled slightly into a faint, contemplative smile, though his eyes were far from joyful. Human nature, mon ami, Poirot mused aloud, more to himself than anyone else. It is both a mystery and a tragedy. We who are capable of great beauty, of deep love, are also capable of such darkness. The mind may seek comfort in secrets, but secrets in turn destroy what they touch. And the cost of keeping them? It is always too high. He paused, his gaze lifting to the sky. The moon hung high above, pale and distant, casting its gentle light over the village. Tonight, this village has learned that truth, no matter how painful, will always come to light. But what do we do with the truth once it is revealed? Poirot asked the knight, his voice softer now. We must learn to live with it, to accept that there is light and shadow in all of us. But in the end, it is justice, however bittersweet, that will guide us forward. With a final glance at the village, Poirot turned and began his walk toward the distant train station. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the promise of a new day. The village, like all villages, would recover in time, but it would never forget. Nor, Poirot knew, would he.